Hello, I'm Melissa Bradshaw from Loyola University Chicago, co-curator of the exhibit Harriet Monroe and the Open Door. Poetry Foundation presents The Amazing Harriet Monroe, the origin story of Poetry Magazine's founding editor. Harriet Monroe was born in Chicago on December 23, 1860. Here she is with Rover, an English setter she called her first hero. She loved him dearly. She also loved her father's library and the spectacular heroes she met there. Harriet was a lonely child, and these friends of the spirit kept her company. Later, she attended a convent boarding school in Georgetown, where she openly quarreled with nuns and argued against the rosary. I was a queer, little, rebellious fish in these strange waters. Over the years, Harriet found friendship and inspiration from her teachers. Her favorite was Sister Paulina, a kindling influence on her poetry. She was excited by the many different ideas she discovered and wrote lots of poems. After school, she wanted to be great and famous. I cannot remember when to die without leaving some memorable record did not seem to me a calamity too terrible to be borne. So she launched her career. She worked for the Chicago Tribune as a drama and art critic. She wrote more than 700 reviews, including reviews of the famous Armory Show, the first U.S. exhibition of modern art. Harriet's admiration of modern art inspired her love of poetry throughout her life. Harriet published poems in magazines and newspapers. Her first book was Valeria and Other Poems. She published several books of poems, plays, and biographies, including her own. Many people asked her to write poems for special occasions, such as the opening of the Adler and Sullivan Auditorium building in Chicago. She was even hired to write the dedicatory poem for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Her poem was performed for a crowd of nearly 100,000 people and sung by thousands in a choir backed by an orchestra. She printed the poems as pamphlets to sell to fairgoers, but they didn't sell. That winter, she burned them as fuel for her stove. But before the World's Fair opened, a New York City newspaper printed parts of the poem on the front page without her permission. She was furious. The newspaper didn't pay her, so she took them to court and demanded compensation. This was the first time a poem was submitted as evidence to a U.S. jury. Harriet read her poem during the trial, which she thought was great fun. Not only did she win the legal battle and enough money to travel the world for a year, she made the case for authors' rights and helped support all poets. Her adventures continued as she traveled west, selling articles about her journeys. Arizona was more stimulating than Italy. It had a richer and profounder and more mysterious message of beauty. All the while, she grew more and more frustrated about the status of poetry in America. She remembered how other artists were paid for their paintings with awards and honors and sold their works for thousands of dollars. Why wasn't poetry the same? Why was there nothing done for poets, the most unappreciated and ill-paid artists in the world? Something must be done, and since nobody else was doing anything, it might be up to me to try to stir up the sluggish situation. Poets needed a magazine, and I would start one for them. Inspired by the art world, she wanted to make a gallery for poems. She asked 100 prominent business people in Chicago to pay $50 for a 5-year subscription to a magazine that hadn't printed a single issue. She was so persistent and so convincing that they agreed. Harriet became the founding editor of one of the longest-running poetry magazines in the world, Poetry, a magazine in verse. The first issue was published in October 1912 and became a sensation. People called her the High Priestess of Poetry, and her open-door policy stands to this day. The open door will be the policy of this magazine. May the great poet we are looking for never find it shut or half shut against his ample genius. To this end, the editors hope to keep free of entangling alliances with any single class or school. They desire to print the best English verse which is being written today, regardless of where, by whom, or under what theory of art it is written. Nor will the magazine promise to limit its editorial comments to one set of opinions. And though she didn't always pay herself, she always paid poets. No poet can pay his shoe bills, she complained. Since then, thousands of world-famous poets have appeared in Poetry magazine, still one of the best-paying magazines for poets around the world. She published many poets now considered the most important poets of their time. Harriet was the editor of the magazine until her death in 1936. She died in Arequipa, Peru, and remains in the highlands of Peru to this day. Beneath the magical mountain called El Misti is a plaque with the inscription, Harriet Monroe, poet, friend of poets. The final chapter of her autobiography, A Poet's Life, 70 Years in a Changing World, was shipped back with her luggage. Is it not enough for us that life is magnificent, and now and then it offers golden moments which shake out the soul like a banner in the wind? Today we celebrate her in the home for poetry she envisioned in 1912. I love my life, but not too well to give it to thee like a flower, so it may pleasure thee to dwell deep in its perfume but an hour. I love my life, but not too well. From Love Songs, published in Poetry, February 1914.